So we're looking at another misconception here. So this one I'm reading off my screen. We gathered these from our community. Children need to experience and navigate stress in order to develop resilience. Self-reg is just bubble wrapping.
Yeah. No. No.
Yeah.
So the first part is true enough. Absolutely. We do want children to engage, encounter stress. It's pretty hard to think of a life where you didn't. Notice how the view of stress there is already sort of it's negative, it's narrow, because there's good stress, there's bad stress. What we really want children to learn is when they are becoming overstressed. It reminds me of your first misconception. Children, what we found at Mary was they can learn they themselves can learn when they're becoming overstressed, at the age of 3. Now, the idea of bubble wrapping is, of course, one of the residues of the self-control paradigm. You need to be tough to cope with stress. And our view is you need to thrive on stress. Stress is the great, we know that stress is important for arousal, important for growth. It's overstress that we're concerned with. And far from bubble wrapping, what we want to see happen is that as the child learns how to maintain that sort of balance that we've been talking about lately, what happens is that their capacity to deal with stress, good and bad, it's the wrong term, their capacity to deal with stress, let's say the stress of education, it grows enormously. So what we're trying to do, what we are achieving, is the very thing that the self-control paradigm was undermining.
Yeah, absolutely. And whenever I hear this misconception, and I hear it in different ways as well, some people think they don't always use the language bubble wrapping, but they're thinking one of the steps is reduce the stress load. That's where individual variability comes in, because and what Stuart's talking about is we're looking for this little window. We're watching our child, we're watching our students, whatever it is. Sometimes it's ourselves for signs of manageable stress. Stress is a good thing. It's actually you can't get away from it. It's part of life, and there's all kinds of stressors that you can learn about with us. But you're looking for the signs when it just becomes too much. Right? And so when I hear this thing about bubble wrapping, it truly is a myth, because if anything, I'm very concerned, we're concerned about that kind of the helicopter parenting you've written about, helicopter schooling and overprotecting, because stress is healthy, and helping children learn to deal with difficult stressors, know how to refuel their own tank, know how to manage what they need to manage, is actually part of getting them ready. And living a good, healthy, balanced life.
You used a term that I haven't heard for a while that was a very important part of my education, and you talked about the window. And in clinical practice, this is referred to as the window of tolerance. And the window of tolerance, what it really means is that it's that sweet spot where we talk about things like flow, creativity, imagination, where the child is not only dealing but thriving, growing from these stresses, engaged, excited, exuberant, etc. But if the child, as will happen inevitably, as the child passes out of the window of tolerance, and some children have a much smaller window of tolerance for, let's say, school-based experiences than other kids because of their stress load for other reasons, then what we have to do is we have to rest and restore. We have to return to that window of tolerance. And one of the most extraordinary aspects of all this is that to come back to our the very first misconception that we did, that children really do learn this very quickly, and they learn maybe only intuitively what that window of tolerance feels like, and they learn themselves what they need to do to grow it, to expand it. if we give them the opportunity, if we create that space where they can do this, feeling safe, feeling secure.
I love the language of gradual release of responsibility. When we do bubble wrap, and we have to be kind to ourselves when we do that, we're worried about kids getting hurt and these sorts of things. But we're really, we're actually regulating. We're regulating the amount of stressors that a child has to deal with. Where we really want to be co-regulating, helping them through to self-regulation. My daughter, for a lot longer than the neighborhood kids, has been going up to the playground by herself. And my next door neighbors have kids at the same age, and they're not allowed to go up to the playground by themselves. What's the difference? Well, I want her to be able to deal with what happens up there, to solve her own problems. She knows what to do in cases of emergency. She has all sorts of strategies, and I gradual release of responsibility. I didn't just say go. It's just one example, but I didn't say just go and up to the playground without ever going up there with her a few times. It's just one example. It's the same around school buses or walking routes, or how far you're allowed to go and play. If she wasn't doing really well, then I would be more present in that. And that's the sort of thinking around it. It's not bubble wrapping at all. It's getting ready for independence. It's the exact opposite.